Moed Katan Daf Yud Daled. We begin with the last few lines in Daf Yud Gimel, which is the beginning of the third parak of the Masechta. This parak is primarily about the rules of Avelos, the halachos of mourning, and it begins with a discussion of taking haircuts and washing clothing on a Chol HaMoed, which is going to relate to the halachos of taking haircuts when mourning. The Gemara will discuss what the reason for the restrictions on haircuts and washing clothing on a Chol HaMoed is, where it applies, what the exceptions are. The Gemara will also get into when the rules of haircutting, how they apply to someone who is in chayrim, someone who's in excommunication, someone who's in mitzora, and somebody who's in mourning. The Gemara will then get, just in the last few words, into the halachos of mourning more specifically. So the Mishnah begins. The Mishnah works with the assumption that the Gemara explains in the first few lines that on a Chol HaMoed it's forbidden to take a haircut or to do laundry. The reason for that is, the Gemara explains, is because if we let people do those things on a Chol HaMoed, then they won't do them before Chol HaMoed, and they'll end up coming into Chol HaMoed in a unclean, unshorn state. We want them to take care of their appearance in advance, l'kavod Yom Tov. Therefore, we don't let them do it on Chol HaMoed because they should do it before Chol HaMoed. Now, the Mishnah lists exceptions. These are situations in which somebody is allowed to take a haircut or allowed to do laundry. So first, here are the ones that are allowed to do haircuts. The Gemara lists 7 exceptions, and they're all people who couldn't do it before Yom Tov. And therefore, there's no point in restricting them from doing it on Yom Tov because it won't help them do it before Yom Tov if they couldn't do it before Yom Tov. So, first we have somebody who was traveling overseas and he comes back on Chol HaMoed. He couldn't take a haircut while he was traveling. Next is somebody who was in captivity. He's released. Third is someone who's in prison. Fourth is somebody who's in excommunication. The rules of someone excommunicated is that he cannot take haircuts. If he was released by the Chachamim on Chol HaMoed, he's allowed to take a haircut. Somebody who had a neder that he's not going to take haircuts, and he got the neder off by asking a Chacham for a Pesach, he's allowed to. A Nazir and a Mitzora who were Tameh, that's a Mitzora had Tumas Tzaras, and a Nazir who became Tameh in his Nazirus time, when they come out of their Tumah state, they begin their entire process with a haircut. They couldn't take haircuts beforehand, they're allowed to do it on Chol HaMoed. There you have your 7 exceptions. Now the following are allowed to do laundry. So first, one who comes from overseas, somebody who comes out of captivity, somebody who comes out of prison, somebody who ends his period of excommunication, that the Chachamim released him. Those are all allowed to wash their clothing. The Gemara mentions 3 types of cloth that can always be washed. That's hand towels, which seem to refer to napkins or handkerchiefs that people use at meals to wipe their hands. The wrappings around Sifrei Torah and Sfarim, and the towels that people use to dry their bodies when they come out of the bath. So bath towels, these things become disgusting quickly and they need to be washed even on Chol HaMoed. Now, people who come out of Tumah, they are allowed to wash their clothing because their clothing is Tameh also. They're allowed to be Metaharet, so those include Zavin, Zavos, Anida, Yoledes, and anyone else that goes from Tumah to Tara is allowed to wash. Okay, the Gemara now explains the reason for the Isser. The Gemara explains that it's similar to the Isser of the Anshe Mishmar and Anshe Maimah. Those are the Kohanim who are on shift, Levim who are on shift, and Yisraelim who are on shift to represent Klal Yisrael during the Karbanos. They had to take haircuts and wash before they went on shift so that they would be in a clean, presentable state during their shift, and they were not allowed to do those things during their week. During their week on shift, they were not allowed to take haircuts or to wash. This is the same reason. One exception for them is that they could on Thursday, the covered Shabbos. Okay, now we'd seen all our exceptions for people who were stuck and they couldn't take a haircut beforehand. The Gemara now asks about other exceptions. So the Gemara says, what about somebody who was very busy on Erev Yom Tov because he lost something? He was busy running around looking for his lost object. He couldn't. So do we say, well, since he couldn't take a haircut before Yom Tov, he's allowed to take a haircut on Chol HaMoed? Or do we say no, because people don't know that that's what it was, and they'll see him taking a haircut on Chol HaMoed, that'll avoid the problem. So Abaye says, we have to have a general rule. We cannot make different rules for different individuals. He has to be the same as everybody else, and therefore it's forbidden for him to, even though he had extenuating circumstances. Now the expression the Gemara uses to solve this is, They'll say, all the designed bread is forbidden, but only the designed bread of baisus is mutter. That's referring to the fact that you were not allowed to make designs on your matzah because it caused it to become chametz. There was a family called baisus that had a special mold they can make the matzah in, and those designs would not take time, but they made it forbidden for them to do it also because people wouldn't know about the special mold and they would get confused with the halacha, and therefore you have to have a general rule that applies to everybody. Now, says the Gemara, however, there is one exception where we do allow a special halacha for an individual. The Gemara wants to know why, and that's somebody who has only one cloak, he's only one chaluk. So he's going to wash his clothing on Chol Hamoed, he's allowed to. So Gemara says, why? Why don't you say the same general rule applies to everyone? Gemara says, no, here everyone will know that he has only one cloak. When he's washing it, he will leave the belt on the cloak. Most people take the belt off to put it on whatever they're going to wear while they're washing this. But this person doesn't have anything else to wear, so he's going to leave his belt on his cloak as he's washing. So everyone will see him doing the washing, they'll know this is the only cloak he has, they'll understand that this is different circumstances. Okay, now the Gemara says, what about if the barber of town lost an object, and therefore he didn't have time to take a haircut himself? So now everybody's going to know that he took a lost object, because everybody's going to him to get a haircut. Everybody will see that he's looking for whatever he lost. So there, people will get confused. Does that count as a valid exception or not? The Gemara asks a question, the Gemara leaves it unresolved. The Gemara says, Teku, the question stands. All right, now the Gemara goes to Allah of somebody who wants to take a haircut or do laundry on Chol Hamoed because he returned from Medina Siyam, he returned from overseas. Our Mishnah had said that that's permitted. The Gemara says that Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. It's a machlokas tanaim. Our Mishnah as a chachamim will say that it's mutter. Rabbi Yehuda says it's forbidden. Now the Gemara divides it up into three cases, three scenarios depending on why he was traveling. Could be he was traveling just for a pleasure trip. He was touring around the world. Could be that he went. The opposite extreme is that he needed to travel for his work in order to be able to have what to eat. Doesn't have any food. The middle would be if somebody is traveling for business, but he has what to eat. This is just to make more money. So the Gemara says those are the three situations. Rava says that the machlokes is only in the middle case. If he's traveling for pleasure, everybody agrees it's usur. If he's traveling for work to have what to eat, everybody agrees it's permitted. If he's traveling to make extra money, does that count as pleasure? Does that count as work? That's a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. So now there is a problem with this setup that the only machlokes is in the middle case, and that's that Rabbi says, near in Rabbi Yehuda, it appears to be correct the words of Rabbi Yehuda if the guy went with permission, and I think that the Chachamim are correct if the guy went without permission. Now, what does this mean, permission and without permission? That means that there are two cases where there is a machlokes, because Rabbi is passing like the Rabbi Yehuda in one of them and like the Chachamim in the other. It means that there are two scenarios where they're arguing. Otherwise, you can't paskin in two scenarios if there aren't two scenarios where there's a machlokes. Now, what are these two scenarios? According to the way we set it up, there's only one scenario where there is a machlokes, and that's the middle scenario. The other two, they agree. So, what exactly is this machlokes about? What exactly is Rabbi referring to? So the Gemara says Rabbi is actually referring to the two where there's no machlokes. And when he said the words of Rabbi Yehuda appear to be correct, where it's a pleasure trip, and the words of the Chachamim appear to be correct, where it's a necessary business trip, he means they correct to each other. They don't argue with each other. The Chachamim don't argue on Rabbi Yehuda that a pleasure trip does not make it permitted for him to take haircuts and to wash his laundry when he returns to Chol Hamoed. And Rabbi Yehuda agrees to the Chachamim that if he needs it for basic food, then he is allowed to take haircuts and wash his clothing when he returns on Chol Hamoed. The only case of the actual machlokes is, like Rav said, in a situation where he could have, where he went for extra money and it's not clear that he needed that at all. All right, now the Gemara talks about the halacha of a child. So there's two versions of this Gemara, opposite what the halacha is, and akasha, according to the first version, is a proof according to the second version, and of course the rejection, the answer to the kasha is a rejection of the proof according to the second version. What's the statement? So the question is a child allowed to take a haircut on a Chol Hamoed? According to the first version, Shmuel says a child, if he's born on Chol Hamoed, is allowed to take a haircut on Chol Hamoed because that's like he came out of jail, right? He was locked up in the womb. However, if he was born before Chol Hamoed, he's not allowed to. That's the implication. According to the second version, Shmuel is saying either way a child is allowed to take a haircut. There is no isser in taking haircuts for a child on Chol Hamoed. So now the Gemara says the halacha of Chol Hamoed should be the same as the halacha of Avelos, when one is in mourning, because you have a statement of we have a brisa that says anyone who's mutter to take a haircut on Chol Hamoed is mutter to take a haircut when he's mourning. That would seem to imply that the halachas are the same. If that's true, then according to the first version, we have a kasha, because it means a child is usher to take a haircut on Chol Hamoed. The isser does apply, unless of course he was born that day. But the isser does apply. According to the second version, this does not apply. The problem is that there is no isser of taking a haircut on a child when he's in Avel. There is no halachas of Avelos on children at all. The Gemara quotes a brisa that says we do kriya, we tear the clothing for a child, but that's not because of Avelos, that's because everyone else who sees the child should be aroused to cry when he sees that a small child has torn clothing as well, but there's no avelis for the child himself. So according to the first version, it doesn't fit because we're saying that there is an Isser Avelis. It seems to be that there is an Isser haircutting during Avelis because there is also an Isser on Chol Hamoed. Because the second version fits very nicely. There is no Isser on Chol Hamoed. There's also no Isser during Avelis. So the Gemara says it's neither proof nor a raya, because all it said there is that those are permitted to take a haircut on Chol Hamoed, are permitted to take a haircut when they're Avelim. Doesn't show that it goes the other way around. Doesn't show that anyone is forbidden to take a haircut when he's Navel. It's forbidden on Chol Hamoed, is also forbidden during Avelis. It could be that you have a child who is forbidden during Chol Hamoed, but is permitted during Avelis because Avelis does not apply to him. Okay, now the Gemara wants to know, what is the halacha of Avelis on Chol Hamoed? Is there Avelis on Chol Hamoed or not? So the Gemara says there is not, because it is a contradiction to the halacha of v'samachta b'chagecha. There's what the Gemara calls a mitzvah asay derabim, a commandment that applies to everyone, to be happy on a moed, and that pushes away, that defeats the individual mitzvah of avelos that an avel has. If the avelos came first, then the mitzvah asay derabim comes and cancels it, and if the yom tov came first, then the avelos doesn't hit at all because it's blocked by the mitzvah derabim of simcha that applied at the time. Okay, now that's talking about avelis. Now the Gemara says, what about a menuda? Menuda is someone who's excommunicated, where the Beis Din or the Chachamim put him in chayrim because he didn't listen to the court or some such violation. So there are special halachos to someone who is in excommunication, including not being able to take a haircut. Do those halachos apply on Yom Tov or not? Or does he get a break over Chol Hamoed? So the Gemara tries to bring a number of proofs on the subject. The Gemara's first proof is that we see that you're allowed to hold court cases on Chol Hamoed. We have a brayso that says you're allowed to judge capital punishment cases. You're allowed to judge the questions of makos, questions of financial owing, who owes who. And in all these cases, if somebody refuses to accept halacha, you can put him in chayrim, you can excommunicate him. So you see here clearly that we are going to excommunicate somebody on Yom Tov. We're going to hold a court case and excommunicate him on Yom Tov. Now, if Yom Tov is going to cancel the excommunication, what would be the point in putting him in chayrim on Yom Tov in the first place? Obviously, therefore, Yom Tov does not cancel the excommunication that comes from not listening to a court case. Now, Abaye rejects this answer, and Abaye says maybe when we say that you're allowed to judge it, we don't mean that you're going to actually hand down the ruling, and if the guy doesn't listen to it, you'll put him in chayrim. Maybe we just mean you can actually look into it, you can think about it, you can work on the case, and if something happens, you'll give the ruling later. So the Gemara says that it has to be that we're just looking into the case, because you can't rule in dini nefashos on Yom Tov. Why? Because if you give the ruling that you need to put somebody, you need to give someone capital punishment, he gets the death penalty, then you wouldn't be able to eat the rest of the Yom Tov. You have a brayso that says, Rabbi Akiva says, the Sanhedrin that gives somebody the death penalty are not allowed to eat the rest of the day, because the pasuk says, you cannot eat on the blood. It's a day of mourning and sadness for them that they were obligated to give someone the death penalty. Now you can't have that happen on Chol Hamoed, you can't fast on Chol Hamoed. So what then? Obviously, we're not saying that you're going to rule in the case, we're just saying you're going to discuss the case. So Gemara says, well, that can't be. Because if you're going to discuss the case and come to a decision in the beginning of the day, and you're not going to rule until the end of the day, so then you are doing what's called inui hadin. You're holding back the fulfillment of the judgment. You came to a decision early in the day and not carrying out until the end of the day. So that's not right. So the Gemara says, no. What happens is as follows. You discuss it in the morning. You don't finalize your decision until the end of the day. Just before the end of the day, you finalize your decision. And if it's a death penalty, you put him to death right before Shkia, and then you can go eat as soon as Shkia is over, because it's not the same day anymore. So therefore, we could have a situation where you could discuss the nefashos on that day, and you won't have to actually do chayrim, and therefore it is possible that you could put somebody in chayrim on Yom Tov. We haven't proven whether chayrim is pushed away by a Yom Tov or not. We don't see here that you can actually put him in chayrim on Yom Tov. Maybe you could, maybe you can't. We could learn the Gemara either way. So I think Gemara brings another proof. Our Mishnah had said that a person who's in the chayrim is allowed to take a haircut on Yom Tov, because if the Chachamim released him. So the Gemara understands that to mean that the Chachamim gave a heter for all people that are in Chayrim to be released from their Chayrim on Yom Tov. So that's saying it clearly that there is no halachas of Chayrim, of excommunication, on Chol HaMoed. So Gemara says that's not what the Mishnah said. The Mishnah said that where the Chachamim released him, that would be because if he was in a fight with someone over money, let's say, he paid it off, or he somehow came to terms with the guy, and he went to the Chachamim and said, my court case is over, you can take my excommunication off, and they took it off. That's what it's referring to, where he personally was released, not because the Chachamim took off the halachos of Nidui on Chol HaMoed itself. That's not what it means. The Gemara now moves on to discuss Tzaras. The Gemara wants to know, does Tzaras apply on Chol HaMoed? Do the Isurim of being outside the camp and all those things, do the halachos apply to a mitzvah exists on Chol HaMoed, or does it get a break from them for Yom Tov? So the Gemara says, if you look at our Mishnah, it said that somebody who's a mitzvah or a nazir comes out of his tumah is allowed to take a haircut on Chol HaMoed. Obviously, it's only if he comes out of his tumah, but while he's in his tumah, he's not allowed to. So the Gemara says, no, maybe there's a different understanding to the Mishnah, and it's a bigger chiddush if he's coming out of his tumah. As long as he's tamei, it's suspended, and for sure he could take a haircut. Somebody comes out of his tumah, now we have a bigger chiddush, because there his haircut is part of his tahara process, and once he starts the tahara process, he has to bring karbanos. And maybe we would say that we don't want him to start the tahara process on Chol HaMoed, because then he'll have to bring the karbanos on Yom Tov, and he's not going to get around to it, he's not going to do it on time. Therefore, maybe we'll stop him and say, don't start the tahara process until after Chol HaMoed, till after Yom Tov. The Mishnah therefore says, even if he's coming out of his tumah, and now his haircut is starting his process, he's allowed to do that. And therefore, you have no proof as to whether he actually has the restrictions of Tzaras on Chol HaMoed or not. So Gemara says, I have another proof, and that's the brisa that says that the word Hatzarua in the pasuk includes a Kohen Gadol, that the halachos of Tzaras apply to a Kohen Gadol as well. Now, a Kohen Gadol has the same halachos, same status halachically as a person who's on Chol HaMoed, because a Kohen Gadol is allowed to bring a karbanos even when he's in onin, and an onin is allowed to bring karbanos on Chol HaMoed. Therefore, they have the same halacha. How do we see that a Kohen Gadol is allowed to bring a karbanos on Chol HaMoed? Because when Aaron was in onin because of the loss of his son's Nadav and Avihu, he told Moshe, I can't eat from the karbanos today because I'm in onin. But he did. He was able to bring the karbanos. So you see, a Kohen could bring a karbanos, and therefore he has the status of person at Chol HaMoed, and just like Tzaras applies to a Kohen Gadol, Tzaras also applies to a person on Chol HaMoed. The Gemara accepts that as a conclusive proof. All right, now the Gemara says, we know that an Avel is not allowed to take a haircut, because the Torah told Aaron and his sons, you do take a haircut. You don't keep the halachas of Avelis. The question is, what about somebody who's a nidui, someone's excommunication, or a mitzvah? What is their halachas with regards to haircuts? The Gemara will get into that lengthy discussion on Daf Tesvav.